Tonight, I invite you to close your eyes and listen to a quiet story buried beneath 40 years of silence. A story about a place that didn't exist on any map. A facility hidden so far north that even the wind carried secrets. They called it Operation North Wind. The year was 1962. The Cold War had settled over the world like a heavy winter coat, thick, cold, and suffocating. Both the Soviet Union and the United States lived in constant fear of each other, fear of mistakes, and fear of the invisible line that separated peace from destruction. Deep in the Arctic zone of the USSR, where the nights were long and the snow never melted, there stood a cluster of low gray buildings connected by underground tunnels. Officially, the place was known only as Object 17, but the men and women stationed there used another name, spoken quietly, almost in a whisper: North Wind. The facility was built to survive anything: storms, earthquakes, even a direct attack. Thick concrete walls, steel reinforcements, sealed air systems, and guards who rarely slept more than a few hours at a time. Most of the personnel never questioned what happened. In the deeper levels beneath their feet, they followed orders, signed documents, and learned quickly that curiosity was dangerous here. The real work, the work that mattered, took place in the lowest chamber of the third bunker, a chamber locked behind a reinforced steel door. A place only 10 people in the entire Soviet Union could enter. Inside that room, a group of scientists worked on a new experimental nuclear device. Not a massive bomb like the ones tested in the deserts. This one was small, compact, meant to fit inside a briefcase, a weapon designed not to level cities, but to tip the balance of power. Each day, the scientists performed delicate measurements, adjusted coils and circuits, and monitored the unstable core sealed inside a containment sphere. Outside, winter winds scraped against the metal structures, howling through the empty plains of snow and ice. The sound was eerie, but the men had grown used to it. They even joked about it sometimes. The North Wind is listening, they said. The North Wind hears everything. What they didn't know was that the North Wind would soon witness something that none of them could ever speak about. Something that would remain hidden in classified archives for 4 decades. Something that began not with an explosion, but with a quiet, almost unnoticeable change inside the glowing heart of the experimental device. A temperature shift, a pressure spike, a moment so small that the computers nearly ignored it. But that moment would change everything. Inside Bunker 3, the air always felt slightly warmer than the rest of the facility. Machines hummed softly along the walls, blinking with small red and green lights. Their cables snaking across the floor like quiet metal vines. The scientists who worked there kept strict routines. Every test, every reading, every adjustment was carefully logged. Nothing was ever left to chance. But even in a place designed to eliminate uncertainty, there were always variables hiding in the shadows. On the night of February 14th, 1962, the team entered the bunker for what should have been a routine diagnostic, a simple low-power activation of the experimental device. Just enough energy to measure stability and reaction times. It was the kind of test they had done dozens of times before, and yet several technicians later said they felt a strange tension that evening, a heaviness in the air that didn't match the machinery or the stale recycled oxygen. At 23:05, the team began preparing the core. The containment sphere, a polished metal orb surrounded by thick shielding rings, glowed faintly from the inside. Not a bright glow, more like the soft pulse of something alive. Breathing slowly in the darkness, lead engineer Dr. Anton Gromov stood at the main console. He had spent 15 years in nuclear research and believed he had seen everything. But even he paused for a moment, watching the gentle flicker inside the sphere. Temperature is stable, he said quietly. Proceed with preliminary checks. Around him, his team moved with silent precision. Clipboards were filled. Numbers were read aloud in calm, steady voices. Switches clicked. For a moment, it seemed like the night would pass without incident. Then, at 23:18, one of the auxiliary monitors flickered. It was subtle, just a faint distortion in the corner of the screen. A young technician frowned and tapped the side of the machine, assuming it was interference from the storm outside. Winter storms in the Arctic often disrupted electronics, so no one paid much attention. But the distortion returned, this time longer, stronger. Is that external interference? Someone asked. Dr. Gromov leaned in, narrowing his eyes at the numbers streaming down the display. Run the secondary diagnostics, he ordered. Another technician typed quickly, initiating the scan. But instead of clearing the glitch, the screen pulsed again. And this time, the temperature reading jumped. Not by much, but enough to catch everyone's attention. Core temperature rising, the technician said. Only 2.4 degrees, but without command input. A silence settled over the room. To most, the numbers meant nothing, but to the people in that bunker, those 2 degrees were a warning. Dr. Gromov's voice lowered. Shut down auxiliary channels. Let's confirm the anomaly. Hands moved quickly. Lights shifted. Data scrolled. But the readings didn't stop climbing. Slowly, steadily, as if something inside the device had awakened on its own. At 2320, the pressure gauge began to rise as well. And that was the moment everyone understood. This was no equipment malfunction. No storm interference. Something inside the core had gone wrong, and the north wind outside howled louder, as if it knew what was coming. The alarm sounded softly at first, a faint wail echoing through the steel corridors of Bunker 3. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. For a moment, no one moved. The hum of machines and the howling Arctic wind were the only sounds. Then Dr. Gromov spoke, his voice steady but carrying a weight no one ignored. Emergency shutdown. Now. Technicians and engineers rushed to the control panels. Buttons were pressed, switches flipped, warning lights blinked red. Every second felt like an eternity. Inside the containment sphere, the glow intensified, pulsing irregularly. The soft, gentle light became harsh, almost alive. The readouts climbed higher. Pressure, temperature, radiation, everything was moving faster than expected. In the dim room, one technician muttered under his breath, "It's not supposed to do this." Another tried to reach the emergency manual, flipping pages frantically. The instructions were clear, written in small type on laminated sheets. But the device inside the sphere ignored every precaution. The team moved in a silent choreography, each person focused, yet aware of the invisible danger surrounding them. Radiation monitors beeped faster. The glow of the core became almost blinding. Outside, the north wind whipped across the frozen plains. It rattled the outer buildings, whistling through vents, as if responding to the energy building inside. No one spoke of it, but every man and woman in that bunker felt it. A presence, silent yet insistent, warning them to act carefully. Arshi. A sudden spike in the pressure gauge made the emergency interlock engage. The containment shields vibrated under the strain. Some metal panels groaned, small cracks appearing where stress had built up over years. Dr. Gromov realized with a sinking feeling that even the reinforced steel might not hold. "Stand back," he shouted. "Everyone to safe distance." The team retreated a few meters, hearts pounding. Even with protective suits, radiation exposure was possible. They watched as the instruments went beyond the red limits, the pulsing light inside the containment sphere growing erratic, almost like a heartbeat in panic. Then, for 12 long, terrifying seconds, the room was filled with a blinding white flash. Not an explosion in the traditional sense, but a sudden, violent energy released that shattered gauges, scorched metal surfaces, and left an imprint of heat in the very walls. No one was physically harmed in that initial moment, but everyone felt the weight of what had almost happened. The north wind outside seemed to howl louder, carrying the sound across frozen fields for miles. When the glow faded, the emergency systems had stabilized the core. The readings returned to near normal levels. The room was quiet except for the low hum of damaged machinery. Breathing was heavy, almost audible in the silence. Dr. Gromov and his team knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that was never meant to be seen, even by themselves. For the first time, the reality of their work, the true danger of the device, sank in. A small voice broke the silence. We could have triggered a full-scale nuclear reaction. And no one dared to argue. After the emergency, silence returned to the bunker, heavy and tense. The north wind outside continued its endless wailing, sweeping snow across frozen plains, carrying secrets no one dared to speak aloud. The team of scientists moved cautiously, checking instruments, recalibrating systems, and taking careful readings. Each number, each measurement reminded them how close they had come to catastrophe. Dr. Gromov walked slowly toward the containment sphere, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the glowing orb that now pulsed steadily, almost peacefully. The moment of panic had passed, but the memory of those 12 seconds lingered, like a shadow over the room. No one spoke of blame. There was none to assign. It was simply the unpredictable nature of the device, its energy, its very existence, that had nearly escaped human control. Outside, the Arctic night stretched endlessly. The stars shone faintly, cold and distant. It was as if the world itself had paused, waiting to see if the humans inside could regain control. The following morning, Dr. Gromov wrote a report for the commanding officers. Every detail was carefully phrased, understated, almost clinical. No emotion, no exaggeration. The document was titled Incident Report, February 14th, 1962, Diagnostic Anomaly. But the higher-ups understood the truth. The north wind had been far more than a simple anomaly. It had been a warning, a reminder that the power they wielded was beyond imagination, and that even the most careful precautions could fail. Within days, the incident was classified at the highest level. The scientists were sworn to secrecy. Files were locked, sealed, and moved to secure archives. Outside personnel were given only vague instructions. The local settlements received nothing, only rumors, whispered over small fires in the long, cold nights. Even among the military, few were told the truth. Only those with direct clearance were aware of the near catastrophe, and even they spoke cautiously, choosing words that hid as much as they revealed. In the years that followed, the bunker continued its work. Tests were refined, instruments recalibrated, and procedures rewritten. The device remained under careful supervision, its existence known to only a select few. But the memory of that night, the sudden spike, the blinding light, the roar of the north wind never faded. For those who had been present, it became a quiet, lingering presence, a reminder that the boundary between control and disaster was thinner than the Arctic ice outside. Decades later, when the Soviet Union collapsed, most of the world remained unaware that Operation North Wind had ever occurred. The files remained hidden, quietly resting in steel vaults, waiting for the day someone might finally speak the truth. And speak it they did, eventually. An old officer, long retired, tired of keeping the secret, decided the world needed to know. He described the night, the flash, the fear, and the overwhelming power that had almost escaped human hands. His words would later form the backbone of the story now told, quietly in the calm of the night, a story for sleep of power, secrecy, and a world that almost changed forever. The Arctic winds never truly rest. Outside the concrete walls of the bunker they swept endlessly, carrying the scent of snow and ice, of isolation and silence. Inside, the men and women of Operation North Wind carried a different weight, the burden of knowledge. Dr. Gromov often found himself standing alone in the early hours, watching the northern horizon fade from black to gray as dawn approached. He thought about the device in Bunker 3, still sealed and pulsing with energy. Still, a reminder of how fragile human control can be over forces far greater than oneself. Each day after the incident followed a strict routine. Tests were conducted with extreme caution, readings meticulously recorded, and new safety protocols were implemented. Yet in quiet moments, the team whispered about that night. 12 seconds of light that could have ended everything. 12 seconds that left marks, not on the earth, but in their memories. Outside, the Arctic tundra seemed calm, almost indifferent. But inside, tension never truly dissipated. Each blinking console light, each faint hum of machinery, reminded them that the potential for disaster was always present. Families of the personnel received vague reports. Serve in the state, accident during routine operations. No one was told the truth. The real story, the danger, the near catastrophe, that remained hidden, sealed away under layers of bureaucracy and secrecy. Years passed. The Cold War continued. The United States and the Soviet Union circling each other like wary predators. Leaders spoke in careful phrases. Diplomats smiled politely. While under the Arctic sky, Operation North Wind continued quietly. Its existence unknown to the world outside. Dr. Gromov often pondered the balance of fear and knowledge. He knew that the world could have been changed in an instant, that a single misstep might have triggered a chain reaction beyond control. And yet, life outside continued as usual. Children played in cities thousands of miles away. Businesses operated and politics marched forward, oblivious to the frozen heart of danger hidden in the northern ice. Some nights, the team would gather quietly in the mess hall, speaking in low tones, voices barely audible over the wind. They spoke of dreams, of life beyond the Arctic, of things they hoped to see when this chapter of secrecy finally ended. No one mentioned the incident by name, but they all knew. It was understood without words. And then there were the moments of silent observation. The containment sphere, glowing faintly, seemed almost alive, a constant reminder that it had survived the anomaly, that it still contained unimaginable energy, and that human hands, however skilled, could not fully control it. The world outside remained unaware. Books on nuclear power and Cold War history contained no mention of Operation North Wind. Reports, analyses, and treaties were silent. Even within the military archives, the files were marked top secret, access restricted, locked in steel cabinets deep underground, only to be opened decades later by those brave enough to speak. For those who had been there, the incident became more than a memory. It became a caution, a story passed silently among colleagues, a quiet, unspoken lesson that power, secrecy, and human ambition can collide in ways the world is never prepared to witness. Decades passed, and the Arctic winds continued their endless march across frozen plains. Operation North Wind remained active, quietly monitored, its secrets safely locked away from the world. But time has a way of bringing truth to light. Even when walls are thick and archives deep. Dr. Gromov retired in the late 1970s. He returned to a quiet life in Moscow. Yet the memory of that fateful night never left him. Each winter, when the wind howled outside his window, he could feel the echo of those 12 seconds, the blinding light, the surge of energy, and the fragile boundary between control and catastrophe. He knew the world would never understand the scale of what had occurred. Even historians, with access to countless declassified documents, would never find the full story. Most of it was buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, hidden under stamps that read Top Secret or Special Archive 53/7. But Gromov carried it with him, a quiet weight on his shoulders, an invisible shadow that followed him through the streets, the metro, the parks where children played, oblivious to the near disaster. By the 1990s, as the Soviet Union had collapsed and the world changed, many of the old officers and scientists had passed away. Their stories died with them, and yet a few brave voices remained. One former officer, now old and weary, decided the world deserved to hear the truth. He spoke of the event, the blinding flash, the panic, and the containment sphere that had almost unleashed forces beyond human control. When these accounts finally reached historians and journalists, the story of Operation North Wind sounded almost unbelievable. A secret nuclear incident in the far north, hidden for 40 years. The Arctic winds carrying whispers of danger and silence. The world had survived without ever knowing how close it had come to disaster. Experts studied the accounts carefully. They reconstructed the events, verified technical details, and marveled at the precision and bravery of those involved. It was clear that even a single misstep could have triggered a far greater catastrophe. The incident became a cautionary tale about secrecy, responsibility, and the dangers of unchecked power. Yet, for those who had been there, It was more than history, it was a memory, etched deeply into their consciousness, even in quiet moments. They remembered the hum of machinery, the faint glow of the containment sphere, and the relentless Arctic wind that had witnessed it all. Some nights, Dr. Gromov would lie awake, thinking of the men and women who had worked beside him, of those who had walked into the bunker without fear, unaware of the danger inside, of the ones who never spoke of what they had seen, and of the lives quietly lost to the shadows of secrecy. The north wind continued to howl across the empty plains, a reminder that the world is vast and human knowledge, though powerful, is never complete, and that sometimes the most important stories are the ones never told. Until now. By the early 2000s, much of the Cold War had become history, its great secrets slowly being revealed, one document at a time, one declassified file at a time. But Operation North Wind remained largely unknown. The bunker, the containment sphere, the blinding flash of February 14th, 1962. These remained confined to the memories of a few surviving scientists and officers. Among them, Dr. Gromov had grown quiet. He spent his days reflecting on a lifetime of service, on the sacrifices, the secrecy, and the invisible weight of responsibility. He understood that the world outside had no idea how close it had come to witnessing forces that could have changed history forever. The retired officer who later spoke out described the events with calm precision. No exaggeration, no dramatization, only facts, quietly spoken, measured, and heavy with decades of silence. The north wind was always there, he said, as if it had a consciousness, as if it knew when to warn us and when to test our courage. The world listened. Experts reconstructed the timeline. They calculated how close the device had been to a full-scale release. The incident was deemed one of the most dangerous nuclear events never revealed. The near-catastrophe was extraordinary not only because of the technology involved, but because of the human restraint that prevented disaster. Dr. Gromov, listening to these discussions from the shadows, felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Relief that the world now knew. Unease that the secret had remained hidden for so long. He remembered the faces of the team, their calm determination, and the quiet courage that had saved lives that no one would ever count. Some nights he would dream of the bunker, the soft hum of machines, the glow of the containment sphere, the numbers climbing too quickly on the instruments. He would wake with a start, feeling the Arctic wind on his face, even though he was thousands of miles away from the northern plains. And yet there was a strange beauty in the memory, the way the north wind swept across the frozen landscape, the silence of the Arctic night, the human presence that stood against the invisible forces within the device. It was a reminder that courage and caution can coexist, that knowledge carries responsibility, and that sometimes the quietest stories carry the deepest truths. Today, Operation North Wind is part of history, its full details slowly emerging from secrecy. The Arctic facility, long abandoned, remains a ghostly monument to the dangers, the secrecy, and the bravery of those who worked there. And as the wind continues to sweep across the frozen plains, one can almost hear it whispering the story. A story of power, danger, and restraint. A story that had waited decades to be told. Even now, the Arctic winds continue to sweep across the endless frozen plains. They carry no sign of the events that once unfolded in the hidden bunker, no trace of the device that pulsed with unimaginable energy, and no evidence of the 12 seconds that could have changed history forever. Yet for those who were there, the memory is as alive as ever. Dr. Gromov, the officers, the technicians, they carry the story quietly within them, a weight of knowledge and restraint that the world outside could never understand. The containment sphere, now long decommissioned, sits in a forgotten storage facility, its secrets locked away behind steel and reinforced concrete. No one will ever know the full scope of its power, and perhaps that is as it should be. For 40 years, Operation Northwind was a story untold, hidden in secret archives, whispered only in the corridors of power. It remained invisible to the public, an invisible thread running through the Cold War, binding courage, fear, and responsibility together. When the story finally emerged decades later, historians marveled at the precision, the discipline, and the human determination that had prevented catastrophe. The Arctic winds had swept silently over the frozen earth, but within the bunker, humans had held their ground. They had controlled the uncontrollable. They had survived the invisible storm. And so tonight, as you listen to this story, imagine the silent snowfields of the far north, the endless winds, the glimmering glow of a hidden device, and the people who worked quietly, bravely, keeping a world unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Sometimes, the most important stories are the ones the world never hears. They live quietly in memories, in whispers, in the wind. They remind us of our limits, of our courage, and of the fragile thread upon which the fate of the world sometimes hangs. Operation North Wind is one of those stories, a story of secrecy, of danger, of humanity standing against forces far greater than itself. A story once hidden, now revealed. A story for sleep, to remind us that the world is both vast and fragile, that even the quietest moments can contain unimaginable power, and that courage often lives in silence. And as the Arctic wind continues to blow, you may close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the memory of that long-forgotten night rest quietly in your imagination. For the world survived, because some stories are held in silence until now.